The Bible and the rifle found next to the body of former model Sheila initially led both the police and the media to believe that she had taken the lives of her entire family before turning the weapon on herself. A supposed ritual tragedy committed in a state of psychosis. For a while, this explanation was accepted as the simple, convenient version of events. But perhaps this case was far more complex than it appeared to be. Neville Bamber was born on June 8, 1924, a former Royal Air Force pilot and later a local magistrate in the Witham District Court. His wife, June, née Speakman, was born just days apart, on June 3, 1924. June was deeply religious, devoted to her Presbyterian faith and strict moral code. She had once worked as a nurse and later as a secretary, but her true dream was to continue her family's tradition, to bring prosperity back to the old farm and see it flourish once more. Neville and June married in 1949 and moved to a Georgian-style farmhouse called White House Farm, near the village of Tolshunt Darcy in Essex. The property sat on 300 acres of leased farmland. Yet long before the Bambers moved in, the house carried a dark history. One of its former residents had drowned himself in a water tank in the basement, and his father had also taken his own life by ingesting poison. These grim details were part of the home's unsettling legacy, small fragments that hinted at the shadows within its walls. The farm, for all its beauty, never became a happy home for the Bamber family. June longed to become pregnant immediately after their wedding, but month after month her hopes were crushed. In those times, infertility was seen almost as a personal tragedy, a kind of death in itself. It was a burden June could not bear, and her grief deepened with every passing season. Her anguish consumed her. She couldn't understand what she had done to deserve such punishment from God. She considered herself a faithful servant, living by his word. She tormented herself with guilt, trying to remember every past moment that might have angered the divine. A disrespectful word to her father, a lack of help to her mother. She prayed for forgiveness, convinced that her inability to conceive was punishment for some forgotten sin. Her bedroom began to resemble a nun's cell, filled with icons and prayer books. She spent hours on her knees in prayer, but her condition only worsened. In 1955, June was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, diagnosed with depression and psychosis. When she was finally released, the couple made a decision. If they could not have a child of their own, they would adopt. It would take another 2 years before that hope was realised. For Reverend Canon Eric J., the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in 1953 marked the pinnacle of his career. As senior chaplain to the Archbishop of Canterbury, he played a crucial role in the ceremony, one that was broadcast across the nation. Yet only 3 years after that moment of honour, the respected clergyman would face a personal scandal. His teenage daughter was pregnant. 17-year-old Christine was immediately sent away, under her mother's maiden name, Webb, to avoid disgracing the family. On July 18, 1957, Christine gave birth to a baby girl in a private maternity home. The child was named Phyllis E. Phyllis lived with her mother for only 2 weeks before she was placed under the care of the Church of England Children's Society and sent to the Sunnyside Nursery in Altbury. Her grandfather, Reverend Eric J., personally oversaw her adoption when she was 3 months old. He chose Neville and June Bamber as adoptive parents, not only because they were deeply religious, but also because he had known Neville from their time together in the Royal Air Force during the war. On October 10th, 1957, Phyllis's name was officially changed. She became Sheila and left Sunnyside for her new home at White House Farm. But the arrival of a child did not bring the comfort June had hoped for. If anything, it intensified her religious obsession. She threw herself into church life, becoming a parish warden and an active member of the local congregation. In 1958, June's fragile state of mind again required hospitalization. But this time, her treatment went beyond medication. She was subjected to electroconvulsive therapy. While June was away, baby Sheila was separated from her adoptive mother and cared for primarily by June's own mother, the children's grandmother. When June eventually returned home, Neville hired a nanny to help with the child, and for a while, their life seemed to regain a fragile stability. A few years later, the Bambers decided to adopt another child. In 1961, they brought home a 6-month-old baby boy named Jeremy. He had been born earlier that year, the son of a vicar's daughter, who had a relationship with a married army sergeant. To avoid scandal, the woman gave up her baby for adoption. Eventually, Jeremy's biological parents married and went on to have other children. Neville and June devoted much of their time to their 2 children. Neville involved them in farm work from an early age. He was a kind, broad-shouldered man, strong as a bear, but gentle in nature, with a warm smile. The children adored him far more than their mother. June, strict and controlling, sought to guide them through faith and discipline. Both parents believed that a good education was essential. Sheila and Jeremy were sent to private schools. Jeremy first attended St. Nicholas Primary, then joined his sister at Malden Court Preparatory School. At age 9, in September 1970, he entered Gresham's School in Norfolk, one of the most prestigious boarding schools in the country, later moving on to Colchester College. Somehow, his classmates learned about his adoption. From that moment, Jeremy became an outsider. Isolated and withdrawn, struggling for years with loneliness and rejection. Sheila's difficulties were of a different kind. At school she was well liked and did well, but life at the farm was a source of constant pain and humiliation. She grew into a remarkably beautiful young woman, something that her mentally unstable adoptive mother saw not as a blessing, but as a curse. To June, beauty was temptation. It drew sinful thoughts. She viewed the world in absolutes, good or evil, light or dark, with no space for the complexity of human nature. Children, in her eyes, were meant to embody purity, yet Sheila's emerging independence was, to her mother, a sign of corruption. June began calling her the cursed child. The lack of affection and emotional warmth from June left Sheila longing to find her real mother. Sheila first attended the local St. Nicholas Church of England school, later joining Malden Court with her brother. Then went on to Moira House Girls' School in Sussex and Old Hall School in Norfolk. Sheila was desperate to escape the control of her deeply religious mother and moved to London to start her own life. After finishing school at 16, she enrolled in the Swiss Cottage Secretarial College and soon began working as a model. During this time, she met a 21-year-old art student named Colin Caffell at a pub called the Three Horseshoes. Their meeting could have been straight out of a Hollywood script. They noticed each other across the crowded bar and instantly fell in love. Colin would later recall that it was absolute love at first sight. He described Sheila as a breathtaking beauty, with the largest, most striking grey-blue eyes he had ever seen. He said she filled him with hope, that she was more beautiful than anything he could ever imagine, even in his most vivid artistic dreams. Colin was creative, sensitive, and romantic, and he courted her with genuine devotion. In 1974, at the age of 17, Sheila became pregnant with Colin's child. The Bambas arranged for a termination, and after that, her relationship with her mother deteriorated even further. Young people grow, make mistakes, and try to find themselves. That's part of being human. But for June, this was proof that Sheila was sinful, impure, and corrupted. Despite the tension, Sheila and Colin continued living together in London. After completing his studies, Colin found work as an advertising sales manager, while Sheila continued her training as a secretary, later studying to become a hairdresser and taking on short-term modelling work, including a 2-month contract in Tokyo. Sheila became pregnant again, and she and Colin married in May 1977. But at 6 months, she suffered another devastating loss. Neville, sympathising deeply with his daughter, bought the couple a flat with a small garden on Carlingford Street, hoping that being closer to home would help her recover. Sheila became pregnant for the 3rd time. But tragedy struck again. Another miscarriage. This time, she began to interpret her losses as divine punishment. Somewhere deep inside, she started to believe that she truly was bad. Her mother, the person closest to her, had spent years reinforcing that very idea. And now, facing such unbearable sorrow, Sheila could not help but think, wasn't this proof that my devout mother was right all along? After 4 months of bed rest in the hospital, on June 22nd, 1979, Sheila gave birth to twin boys, Daniel and Nicholas. But even this joyful event, after so much heartbreak, could not mend the growing distance between her and Colin. He cruelly accused Sheila of being unfaithful, while he himself was having an affair during her pregnancy. At Sheila's own birthday party, Colin left with another woman right in front of her eyes. Shattered, Sheila had a breakdown. In a fit of anguish, she began striking the windows with her fists until her hands were cut and bleeding. She was hospitalized soon after. In May 1982, the couple divorced. After the divorce, Colin rather quickly began a new relationship with another model named Jen. Despite everything, he remained a devoted and responsible father. He spent a great deal of time with his sons and often took them to stay with him. Although Sheila and Colin had separated amid turmoil, they managed to maintain a friendship afterward. Sheila and the twins moved into a smaller flat in Maida Vale, one that her father once again helped her secure. But the following years were filled with pain. She was haunted by depression. Sheila gave up her modelling career. Once a striking beauty, she now survived on welfare benefits and took low-paying jobs. For a time, she even worked in a London restaurant where young women dressed in school uniforms served customers. She also posed for a few nude photo shoots, a decision that only deepened her emotional distress. Her mental state continued to deteriorate. Sheila began drinking heavily, experimenting with drugs, and surrounding herself with much older men. Her frail, doe-like appearance earned her the nickname Bambi. Her friends and family began noticing unpredictable bursts of anger and sudden violent fits, moments when she would bang her head against the wall in frustration. Colin started taking the twins to live with him more frequently. In 1983, the family doctor referred Sheila to psychiatrist Hugh Ferguson, the same doctor who had once treated her mother, June. He described Sheila as highly agitated, paranoid, and psychotic. According to his report, she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital where she was later diagnosed with a schizoaffective disorder. After her release, she was prescribed antipsychotic medication. During this period, Sheila's brother Jeremy was, in contrast, enjoying what seemed to be the best years of his life. He travelled extensively. Neville funded a trip for him to Australia, where Jeremy completed a scuba diving course, and then he went on to explore New Zealand. Jeremy returned to England in 1982 and began working on his adoptive parents' farm, White House Farm, receiving a salary from Neville. He lived 6 kilometres away, in another house owned by the family. Neville also gave Jeremy a car and an 8% share in the family business that managed a caravan site. But Jeremy's lifestyle troubled his parents. He was growing marijuana in his backyard and having an affair with a married woman who had 3 children, something that particularly disturbed June. However, to her great relief, Jeremy eventually ended the affair, as she called it, a sinful relationship, and began seeing a new woman, Julie Mugford. Julie was a student at Goldsmiths College in London and worked as a bartender in the evenings. By 1985, the couple was planning their wedding. In March 1985, Sheila was hospitalised again after another severe psychotic episode. This time, she believed she was communicating directly with God. Her mind twisted into terrifying delusions. She became convinced that an evil presence had taken hold of her, and that she could project this darkness onto others. She feared she might somehow corrupt her children, that they might become tainted because of her. She called them the children of darkness, echoing the same cruel phrase her mother June had once used to describe her. Sheila had begun saying she believed she might be capable of harming her own children. She also spoke of ending her own life. At this point, Dr. Ferguson concluded that she was suffering from schizophrenia. She was discharged after 4 weeks and continued treatment as an outpatient, receiving monthly injections of haloperidol, an antipsychotic medication with sedative effects. From then on, the twins spent most of their time living with their father. In his 1994 book, In Search of the Rainbow's End, Colin wrote that Sheila's mental health often deteriorated after visiting her family, especially after spending time with her mother. In May 1985, Sheila was finally given the chance to meet the woman who had brought her into the world, Christine. They had been exchanging letters for several years. They spent most of that day together. Christine told her daughter that she had never truly wanted to give her up, but that she had loved her father and felt she had to do what was expected of her. Colin would later describe the reunion as one of the most moving and important moments in Sheila's life. "I will never forget the expression of pure joy on her face when I saw them together for the first time," he wrote. "She was beaming, smiling from ear to ear in a way I hadn't seen since the twins were born. There was an instant connection between them." Afterward, Sheila told her ex-husband that Christine was everything she had ever dreamed of, and that with her support, things would finally be different, better. On Sunday, August 4th, 1985, Colin drove Sheila and the twins to White House Farm so they could spend a week with Neville and June. Afterward, Colin planned to take Daniel and Nicholas on a holiday trip to Norway. The boys, however, weren't excited about staying at the farm. They didn't like their grandmother. In fact, they were afraid of her. The twins complained that she made them pray constantly, even when brushing their teeth. In his book, Colin recalled one moment when Daniel pointed up at the sky and said, "I think Grandma loves the one up there more than she loves any of us." One of the photographs from the crime scene later revealed something unsettling. On the wardrobe door of the twins' bedroom, someone had carved the words, "I hate this place." That sunny day, The housekeeper had seen Sheila and noticed nothing unusual. Two of the farmhands saw her again the next day with the children. They said she was smiling a lot. On Tuesday evening, August 6th, Jeremy visited the farm. A worker heard him leave around 9:30 p.m. Barbara Wilson, the farm secretary, also called Neville around that time and got the distinct impression that she had interrupted an argument. Barbara Wilson later said that when she called, Neville had sounded unusually sharp with her, even irritated, and had abruptly hung up, something he had never done before. He was normally a calm, even-tempered man. Around 10 p.m, June's sister, Pamela Boutflower, also phoned the house. She first spoke with Sheila, who sounded quiet and subdued, and then with June, who seemed calm and composed during their conversation. At 3:26 a.m. on August 7th, Jeremy called the Chelmsford police station from his home. He told the duty officer that his father had just called him, saying that Sheila had lost control and was holding a gun. Then, according to Jeremy, the phone line from White House Farm suddenly went dead. He added that his sister had a history of mental illness and could be dangerous. Jeremy arrived at White House Farm shortly after the police. 3 officers later testified that he had been driving significantly slower than they were. They overtook him and reached the property 1 or 2 minutes before he did. At 4 a.m, 2 officers, accompanied by Jeremy while a third stayed by the car, made their way through the long garden toward the farmhouse. One of them reported seeing a shadow moving through the windows, someone walking inside. The officers hesitated to enter and decided to wait for backup. The 3 of them hid in the bushes, watching the silent house. But after a while, there was no further movement, only eerie stillness. The tactical firearms unit didn't arrive until around 5 a.m, and the commanding officer decided to wait for daylight before making entry. Using a loudspeaker, they attempted to communicate with Sheila, but there was no response. During this time, one of the officers spoke intermittently with Jeremy, who, according to their later accounts, remained fairly calm. He told them that he and his sister didn't get along, that she had been unwell, and that she was undergoing psychiatric treatment. He also mentioned that Sheila was familiar with firearms and that they had once practiced target shooting together. When asked why he had called the local police station instead of dialing 999, Jeremy replied that he hadn't thought it would make any difference in response time, and that he had never dealt with anything like this before. He added quietly that he had driven slowly because he was scared. "Everything's going to be all right, isn't it?" he asked one of the officers. "Yes," the officer replied. When police examined the farmhouse, they found that all the doors and windows were locked from the inside, except for one window that was slightly open. At 7:54 a.m, officers finally forced entry by breaking down the back door. It was locked from within, with the key still in the lock. The first body they discovered was Neville's, lying on the kitchen floor beside an overturned chair. He was dressed in pajamas. He had been shot 8 times, 6 of the bullets to the head, fired from just a few centimeters away, and 2 more shots to the body from a distance of roughly 1.5 meters. Based on the position of the spent cartridges, investigators concluded that the first shots were fired upstairs. Neville had likely managed to make his way down to the kitchen, where a violent struggle followed. One of the lamps had been smashed, sugar was scattered across the floor, plates shattered, and chairs overturned. The telephone was found on the kitchen counter, the receiver off the hook, lying beside several empty shell casings. Later examination of Neville's body revealed bruises on both cheeks, linear marks on his right forearm, and bruises on his left wrist and forearm. consistent with being struck repeatedly, possibly with the butt of a weapon. The kitchen floor was soaked in blood. But this was only the beginning of the horror inside White House Farm. The silence that followed was chilling, the kind that carries an unspoken warning. Every room in the house concealed a dreadful discovery. As the officers climbed the stairs to the second floor, they found a long corridor lined with open doors on either side. Inside the children's bedroom, they discovered the bodies of the twin boys, both shot in the head as they lay in their beds. Daniel still had his finger in his mouth, his head turned slightly to the side. He had likely been shot while asleep. Daniel had been shot 5 times, Nicholas 3. It appeared that Nicholas had awakened and looked directly at his attacker. All 3 bullets had struck his face. Every shot was fired at contact or near contact range. June's body was covered in blood. She was found lying on the floor of the master bedroom near the doorway, still wearing her nightdress. She had been shot 7 times, 1 bullet to the forehead, between the eyes. 5 of the shots were fired from roughly 30 centimeters away, including the fatal wound to her forehead. Sheila was found on the same bedroom floor, near her mother. She too was wearing a nightdress. She had suffered 2 gunshot wounds. Pathologist Dr. Peter Venezis, who would later become Professor of Forensic Medicine at the University of Glasgow in 1993, reported that the lower of the 2 injuries had been inflicted from a distance of approximately 76 millimeters, while the upper wound was a contact shot. The upper wound would have caused instantaneous death. The lower one, though also fatal, might not have killed her immediately. Dr. Venezis noted that a person with such an injury could potentially have stood or moved. Yet the blood pattern on Sheila's nightdress indicated she had remained seated when both shots were fired. He reasoned that the lower wound came first, as it caused internal bleeding in the neck, something that would have been far less pronounced had the upper, instantly fatal shot occurred first. The rifle, without silencer or scope, was found resting across her chest, pointing upward toward her throat. Her right hand was lightly touching it. June's Bible lay on the floor beside Sheila, touching her right hand. It was open to pages 656 and 657, Psalms 51 through 55. The passages were later interpreted by theologian Dr. Gillingham of Worcester College, Oxford, who concluded, "In this case, Psalm 51 could not be more fitting. It speaks of fear of divine punishment, the need for repentance, and the offering of an extraordinary sacrifice of contrition to atone for one's guilt. It is, in essence, the prayer of a sinner, one who feels burdened by great wrongdoing and pleads for God's forgiveness." Overall, the Psalms reflected Sheila's apparent desire for purification, a symbolic washing away of evil deeds, and expressed faith that God would forgive and free the soul from sin after death. Normally, June's Bible had been kept in Sheila's bedside table drawer. The investigation ultimately concluded that it was impossible to determine whether Sheila had taken her own life or if she had been killed. The sequence of deaths within the family also remained uncertain. A total of 25 shots had been fired, most from close range. One of the officers approached Jeremy and instructed him to remain near the police cars with the other officers who had stayed outside. "We found them all dead," the officer said immediately. Jeremy broke down at once. His breathing became shallow and erratic. "You said everything would be all right," he kept repeating. His voice trembled, his body shaking uncontrollably. Then he began to faint. Paramedics arrived quickly, taking him by the arms and leading him to sit down, urging him to breathe deeply. Jeremy kept whispering, "Where's my father? Tell him to come out. Please, let him come out." He slipped into a state of deep, traumatic shock. The initial investigation quickly settled on a single narrative: murder-suicide. Chief Inspector Thomas Jones was convinced that Sheila had killed her entire family. From the very start, police fixed their position and refused to reconsider it. They had found a .22 caliber rifle in Sheila's hands. The farmhouse was locked from the inside, and Jeremy himself had told them that his father had called him, terrified, saying that Sheila had lost her mind and was armed. Jeremy's emotional breakdown when told of the deaths seemed to confirm the tragedy's authenticity. He appeared devastated, desperate, and inconsolable. Investigators believed that Sheila's apparent breakdown was triggered by an argument with her parents the night before, one that Jeremy and several farm workers had overheard. During dinner, the family had discussed placing the twins in daytime foster care, as Sheila was struggling to cope and Colin was often away for work. June, never one to soften her words, told her daughter outright that she was a bad mother. Sheila, detached and vacant, didn't respond. Detective Jones soon learned that Sheila had been discharged from a psychiatric hospital in March after treatment for a psychotic episode. Her ex-husband, Colin Caffell, had written a letter to Neville shortly afterward, expressing his concern for the boys' safety and well-being while in their mother's care. That letter was later found in Neville's desk drawer. "We all know that Sheila lives in her own little world and barely notices anything outside her thoughts," Colin had written. Police also discovered that Neville kept several firearms at the farm. By all accounts, he had been something of an enthusiast, a man who loved maintaining his guns and often spent evenings cleaning them. Most of the collection was stored in a special cabinet that was not kept locked. On November 30th, 1984, Neville had purchased a .22 caliber semi-automatic rifle with a silencer and 500 rounds of ammunition. It was a common hunting weapon, typically used for shooting rabbits. The scope could be removed with a screwdriver, though most owners left it in place, since resighting the rifle afterward was time-consuming. Jeremy told investigators that on the evening of August 6th, he had loaded the rifle after hearing what he thought were rabbits outside. He claimed he didn't fire it and had left it in the kitchen, loaded, with a box of ammunition beside it, before going out. At that moment, he said, the gun had no silencer or optical sight attached. Jeremy suggested that his father must have added them later. In Detective Jones's mind, the story was complete. Everything fit neatly. The locked house, the loaded rifle, the history of mental illness. Now, the beautiful face of Sheila Bamber, once gracing glossy fashion magazines, appeared on the front pages of British newspapers beneath headlines of horror. The Daily Express, on August 8, 1985, ran the story under the headline, "Farm Family Slain in Bloody Massacre." The article read, "Armed with a rifle taken from her father's collection, mentally disturbed divorcee Sheila Bamber, 28, first shot her 6-year-old twin sons, then turned the gun on her father as he tried to call for help. After that, according to the official version, Sheila turned the .22 caliber semi-automatic rifle on herself. 3 days after the killings, Neville Bamber's cousins, Ann Eaton, David, and Robert Boutflower, met with Detective Thomas Jones. They told him they didn't believe Sheila could have carried out such a brutal attack. She was hopelessly uncoordinated and completely inexperienced with firearms, they said. Poor Sheila couldn't even pour a cup of tea without spilling it. The family firmly believed that Jeremy Bamber had killed everyone for the inheritance. But, to Detective Jones, their theory seemed far-fetched. He was convinced his initial conclusion was correct. After all, there had been reported movement inside the house while police and Jeremy were still outside. According to the firearms team's radio log, at 5:25 a.m., officers believed they had made contact with someone inside the farmhouse. For Jones, that was enough. The case seemed open and shut, and within days, newspapers across Britain echoed that sentiment. But that certainty came at a high cost. The investigation was never handled properly. Jeremy's clothes weren't examined for an entire month. The bodies of Neville, June, and Sheila were cremated, and all blood samples were destroyed. The crime scene itself wasn't secured or methodically documented. Evidence wasn't catalogued, photographed, or preserved. Within days, police burned the blood-soaked bedding, mattresses, and carpets from the house. Just 3 days after the murders, Jeremy Bamber was handed back the keys to the property. Not everyone in the force shared Chief Inspector Jones's confidence. Detective Sergeant Stan Jones, no relation to the Chief Inspector, wasn't convinced at all. "What kind of suicide victim shoots herself twice in the throat?" he asked. He noted several troubling inconsistencies that no one seemed eager to address. How could Sheila have overpowered her father, a 193-centimetre tall, physically strong 61-year-old farmer who worked hard every day? Neville hadn't just been shot. He had been attacked. His head bore long marks consistent with blows from a rifle butt. The kitchen clearly showed signs of struggle. Yet according to the pathologist's report, Sheila's own body bore no evidence of a fight. Her hands and legs were clean, her fingernails neatly trimmed and unbroken. There was no blood, dirt, or gunpowder residue on her fingertips. There were no traces of lead dust, something normally found on the hands of anyone who has handled ammunition. The rifle's magazine had been reloaded at least twice during the shootings, a process that usually leaves both lubricant and bullet material on the fingers. But Sheila's hands were pristine. There was no blood or debris on her legs, nothing like the sugar scattered across the kitchen floor below. At autopsy, only minute traces of lead were found on her hands and forehead, far too little to indicate she had fired the weapon herself. And soon, more questions surfaced. On the day of the murders, police had searched Neville's gun cabinet on the ground floor and found nothing unusual. But 3 days later, when members of the extended Bamber family, accompanied by Basil Koch, the executor of the estate, visited the farmhouse, one of the cousins, David Boutflower, made a shocking discovery. Inside that same cabinet, he found a silencer and a rifle scope. Upon examining the silencer, they noticed damage to its surface, along with what looked unmistakably like red paint and traces of blood. Wedged within its parts, they also spotted a single grey hair. The relatives immediately informed the police, who collected the silencer, but only on the third day, August 12th. By then, the grey hair that had been stuck in its mechanism was already lost before the silencer ever reached forensic labs. The family themselves returned to the farmhouse to investigate further. Searching for the source of the red paint found on the silencer, they discovered damage to the underside of the red-painted kitchen mantel shelf. On August 14th, forensic specialists took paint samples from the shelf. The analysis showed an exact match, containing the same 15 layers of paint and varnish as the chipped section on the silencer. Later, on October 1st, casts of the marks on the mantelpiece were made. The forensic team confirmed that the indentations matched perfectly, proving that the silencer had come into direct contact with the mantel's surface. The blood found on the silencer was identified as type A, the same as Sheila's, though it could have also belonged to Neville or June. DNA testing was not yet available at the time. Additionally, the sample showed the presence of an enzyme known as AK1, which investigators interpreted, somewhat loosely, as further proof that the blood came from Sheila. This discovery would later become a central piece of evidence in the Crown Court trial at Chelmsford in 1986. On August 16, 1985, the funeral took place. Jeremy sobbed throughout the service, clinging to his fiancée, Julie Mugford, for support. He appeared exhausted, shattered by grief. Yet, within just a couple of days, Jeremy's behaviour began to raise eyebrows. He was seen dining with friends at a Caribbean restaurant, drinking champagne. Shortly afterward, he and Julie left for a trip to Amsterdam. His conduct, carefree, indulgent, almost celebratory, seemed entirely inconsistent with mourning, and for the rest of the family this was the final confirmation of their suspicions. They now fully believed Jeremy was responsible for the murders. But by then, cracks in their version were beginning to show, and soon, something happened that they could no longer ignore. Jeremy's fiancée, Julie Mugford, came forward. At first, Julie had been one of his strongest supporters. Photographs from the funeral show Jeremy clinging to her arm, crying into her shoulder. But everything changed a few weeks later. On the night after the murders, Julie had told police that Jeremy called her around 3:30 a.m. on August 7th, sounding shaken. "Something's wrong at home," he said. At the time, she saw it as nothing more than a worried boyfriend's call. But on September 3rd, 1985, her feelings shifted dramatically. That night, Jeremy received a phone call from an old girlfriend and invited her on a date right in front of Julie. A furious argument followed. Julie threw something at him, hit him, and Jeremy twisted her arm behind her back. 4 days later, she went to the police and changed her statement. In her new testimony, Julie said that Jeremy had often spoken contemptuously about his family, referring to his old man, his crazy mother, and his hysterical sister. He had described the boys as unruly and spoiled, and admitted they annoyed him. He said he hated them all, Julie told police. He thought his parents were selfish for not giving him enough money. Then she dropped the most explosive revelation of all. Jeremy had a plan to get rid of his family. According to her, he had described putting sleeping pills in their drinks during dinner and then setting the farmhouse on fire with everyone inside. Sheila, he allegedly told her, would make the perfect scapegoat. Then, according to Julie, Jeremy changed his mind about setting the farmhouse on fire. He didn't want to destroy valuable possessions. She claimed that Jeremy discussed in detail how to enter the house quietly, through a window with a broken latch, and then escape through another, pulling it shut from the inside so it would appear locked if the frame was dropped forcefully. Julie spent the weekend before the murders at Jeremy's house. He called her around 9:50 p.m. on August 6th, saying he'd been thinking about the plan all day, that he was angry, and that it was going to happen, tonight or never. A few hours later, around 3:30 a.m., he called again. "Everything's going perfectly," he said. "I haven't slept all night. Goodbye, darling. I love you so much." After the murders, when they were finally alone, Jeremy reportedly said to her almost smugly, "I should have been an actor." Julie asked him outright if he had done it. He told her no, but said a friend had carried it out for him. He explained that he'd told this friend exactly how to enter and leave the house, and even instructed him to call Jeremy from one of the farmhouse phones, using the redial function, so that if the police ever traced the call, it would create an alibi for him. "Everything went according to plan," Jeremy supposedly said, "except that Neville fought back. My friend got angry and shot him 8 times. Then he made Sheila sit down and shot her last. He placed the Bible beside her to make it look like a religious suicide." Julie told police that Jeremy had paid the accomplice £2,000 for the job. By her own admission, while she believed herself engaged to a loving fiancé, she had been spending the blood money from his murdered family, fully aware of what had happened. When officers arrived, he said, "I can't believe this is happening. I'm innocent." He was taken into custody on September 8th, along with his alleged friend, though the latter was soon released after producing a solid alibi. Thank you for staying with me till the end of today's episode. The next chapter will change everything, so don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss it.